expecting myself to talk about yung latest election sa Colombia, no? Very exciting yung mga elections ngayon sa Latin America, mga amigos natin. Of course, shortly guys, I'll talk about comparative politics. Anong ibig sabihin ng comparative politics? Bakit mahalaga ito? Why should we pay attention to Latin America? What is with Latin American countries that makes them very interesting, very exciting, very relatable, and more importantly, the lessons we can learn from them. So I'll discuss that shortly. So just the other day, no, guys, of course, natapos yung first round ng election sa Colombia. And this is an interesting thing. Yung finals nila is parang ang dalawang kandidato na pumasok sa second round kasi may runoff election sila. Unlike the Philippines, weirdly, sila may runoff election sila. And both the candidates na nakapasok sa second round, guys, ay parang ganito, parang nangyari Calyodi versus Duterte. And Calyodi, yung version nila ng Calyodi, got more than 40% votes. Then yung version nila ni Tatay Digong got more than 20% votes. So magkakaroon silang second round because no one got more than 50% plus one. So Gustavo Petro, former Bogota mayor, if I'm not mistaken, a very progressive guy, calling for progressive taxation among other things. He won 40.3% in the first round. At ang kalaban niya, yung third placer doon sa mga previous surveys, a kind of a right-winger business guy, but also a populist anti-system guy who won 28.2%. Si Federico Gutierrez, who was supported by their version of, Uniteam. So medyo traditional to, mga traditional politics in many ways. Oh, don't tell me hindi traditional politician, mga Marcoses and Dutertes, alright? He finished third with 23.9% of the vote, although afterwards, nag-concede siya and nag-endorse siya kay Hernandez versus Petro. But so it's gonna be a tricky situation because if the 23% all go to Gutierrez, which I doubt, then actually Petro could actually lose. But many are betting that Petro, yung version nilang Calyodi, might actually put it off and become the next president of Colombia. Now, this is nothing unique in recent months and in Latin America because this is part of a bigger wave that experts are calling the pink tide 2.0. So shortly, I'll talk about the pink tide. At mahalaga yan dahil yung mga pink dito sa Pilipinas, yung mga tinatawag na kakampink, maybe they can learn a thing or two from the pink tide in Latin America. And I'll discuss that even more later on. No? We'll discuss even more Colombian elections as we go into the second round this month. And then let's see anong mangyari. Okay, so let me go to the pink tide. Now, first of all, classroom. Classroom talaga. One thing you have to keep in mind is this. Yung concept ng comparative politics. Alright? Comparative politics. Very important yan. So, ano ibig sabihin yan? You know, as one Yale political scientist said back in the day, if you only know one country, you know no country. Because only in comparing yourself to others, so sa sociology, mirror effect ang tawag dyan, di ba? Malalaman mo lang kung gaano ka kagaling or gaano ka hindi magaling, right? Kung kinompara mo sarili mo sa peers mo. Meaning people or comparable to you. So hindi apples and oranges, but apples and apples. Maybe green apples versus, Snow White, red apples, but more or less, dapat apples versus apples, right? Of course, no two things are exactly the same. But the point of comparative politics is that by juxtaposing the similarities and differences among peers, people of or any specimen you want to study of similar backgrounds, doon may makukuha kang lesson. Diba? So, yun ang nakikita natin dito. Bakit wala akong nakikitang comments? Ang nakikita ko lang dito, who's watching me? Wait lang. This is... Okay, I want to see... Nagka-comments ba kayo dyan? Ayan, because I need to be able to see your comments. Okay. Anyway, ano ba nangyari dito sa Meta? Okay. So, eto, balikan natin. So, that is why mahalaga talaga na pinag-aaralan din natin mga ibang bansa at titignan natin yung mga bansa na peers natin. And if you look at it, Latin America is very, very similar to Philippines. Hindi lang in terms of our Hispanic background, lahat tayo Spanish colonies. In fact, yung revolution nila Rizal, according to scholars like Benedict Anderson, was the last Latin American revolution in a way because it started with Bolivarian Revolution, Colombia, etc. And then, this is mid-19th century, and then towards the end, Cuba at Pilipinas na lang natirang medyo matino-tino colonies ng Spain, and then humabol na rin tayo. So anyway, we were part of this arc of Latin American or ex-Spanish colonies rising up. No, so you had Mexico, Colombia, all the way to Cuba and then Philippines. Now later on na tayo pwede natin pag-usapan kasi yung revolution ni Bonifacio was actually timed because ang calculation ni Bonifacio was Spain could not fight on two fronts at the same time because they were bogged down sending, 100,000 troops to Cuba to quell the rebellion there. Kaya yung Philippine rebellion had a good chance. Something that Rizal didn't know that much kasi nasa dapitan siya and all of that. But we are digressing. But the point I want to make here, and I'm trying to show you here, is this, guys. That comparative politics matters because it helps you understand saan tayo galing, ano yung mga similarities natin, what can we learn from other countries. So, yes, no two countries are alike, no two persons are alike, even twins are not exactly the same. But if you have 90% similarity on so many levels, then maybe some comparison can help you out. We do the same thing in sports, right? We do the same thing in academia, etc. So, ang tawag dyan comparative politics or comparative analysis for that matter. No. Now, if you look at Latin American countries, they're very similar to the Philippines on so many levels. In some ways, they're actually even worse. So kung nanood kayo ng Narcos and all of that, you would know that they're actually worse than the Philippines in many ways. Yung law and order situation is worse. They have narco politics 10 times worse than the Philippines in places like Mexico, etc., despite all the exaggerations of Tatay Digong. At the same time, if you look at them, they also have very unequal societies. So concentration of wealth among the rich in their country is very similar to the Philippines. Or concentration of wealth and economic activity in big cities is very similar to places like the Philippines. Like Mexico City and Monterrey, or let's say Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia, or let's say Buenos Aires. So those big cities tend to be also a major centers of agglomeration of economic activity. So one way to actually assess, so learn this classroom, one way to assess inequality in a country is to look at what they call Gini coefficient. Alright? Hindi Genie, yung Genie in the bottle, Aladdin. So Gini coefficient, doon mo makikita yung level of concentration of economic wealth. If you look at the Philippines Gini coefficient, and then you look at Gini coefficient of most Latin American countries, we're very, very similar. Although dito sa Asia, we're the worst in terms of concentration of economic growth. So in 2011 and 12, something like that, World Bank said that the 40 richest families in the Philippines took home 76% of newly created wealth. So crazy level of concentration dito. Guess what? Go to Latin America, very similar to us. In terms of political dynasties and all, they're not as bad as us, but they also have their own versions of political dynasties and few parties and big families controlling their politics too. So in that sense, napaka-similar natin doon sa mga Latinos. We're very, very similar to our Latino brothers and sisters. So it's not just cultural background, but also our political economy, meaning the interaction of our political institutions and the processes by which we produce economic growth or not properly distribute economic growth, right? So in that sense, for me, Latin America is a part of the world that we're not paying enough attention to. Para sa akin, mas similar pa tayo sa mga Latin American countries na yan kaysa some of our neighboring countries like Singapore, Malaysia, or even Thailand, for instance. They have a very different nation-state formation background than us, not to mention religion, culture, etc. So I think a lot of Latin American countries are very helpful for us to understand where we are in the broader scheme of things, right? Now, you think the Philippines is unique. So obviously, you're not traveling enough or you're not studying enough, right? And kaya nga, alam mo, iritang-irita ako when I'm in a conference and all. And then we have this culture of self-deprecation. Ang Pinoy lang ganito, Pinoy lang ganito. You don't know what you're talking about. Yung mga nakikita kong PowerPoint, ito yung mga pinaka-pathetic. So, sorry to say it, yung PowerPoint. In the Philippines, these are the rules of traffic. This is the reality of traffic. And then, eye-roll ako parang, nakapunta ka ba sa Dhaka? Or nakapunta ka ba sa Mumbai? Or even New Delhi? Like, go to YouTube, put Delhi or Mumbai traffic, biglang makikita mo parang ang ganda ng traffic sa Pilipinas. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Siyempre, hindi mo makompare ang Pilipinas sa, I don't know, Zurich or Geneva or, you know what I'm saying? Or like San Francisco. Although LA is very traffic, no? So obviously, if you actually compare us to a lot of countries, if you go to Brasilia, you go to a lot of Latin American countries, Mexico City, grabe yung traffic, di ba? Grabe yung also yung infrastructure problems, etc. So minsan yun ang problema natin. Meron tayong wrong concept of, ito classroom, exceptionalism. So we have this Filipino exceptionalism myth that, ang Pinoy lang ganito, ay Pinoy lang ang pasawa, ay Pinoy, like, no! If you go around the world, you study other countries, may mas malala pa sa Pilipinas, di ba? And maraming bansa na katulad natin. A lot of things in the Philippines are so third world, they're so common. Some of it is even fourth world. Tanong mo na si tatay, mga tatay style. So that is what I'm saying. Comparative analysis is very, very important. That's why I'm saying understanding what's happening in other countries is very, very important. In fact, if you look at it, a lot of my predictions about President Duterte came true. A lot of them came true. Forget about the bloggers and all the incompetence, everything is in forms. It's because I studied people who are similar to Duterte. Narendra Modi of India. People like Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. People even like Jokowi or Prabowo Subianto in Indonesia. Some would even push it and say Bolsonaro or Obrador. You know what I'm saying? So, comparative analysis is extremely important, guys, pagdating sa political analysis. Because in comparing our red apple to the green apples or other red apples, then we could see how big, small, problematic, fresh, nutritious our apple is. Obviously, you cannot compare it to oranges. Like, you cannot compare us to Switzerland. I mean, they're a completely different setup, right? Or Scandinavian. We're not Norway, okay? We're not Sweden. But I think we can compare ourselves a lot to Latin American countries. Now, this brings me to the second issue. Now, I don't know. I'm not private to any campaign. I've not been involved in any campaign, etc. Yes, people ask us questions. I mean, you're supposed to be an expert, right? But I've not been involved in any campaign. So I'm non-partisan. I've not endorsed anyone, etc. So I don't know where this color pink came from. In decision to go pink for Leni Robredo. But nonetheless, I couldn't help, because if you have a background in comparative politics, see the similarity with the so-called pink tide in Latin America. Now, we are already in pink tide 2.0, so a second wave is happening. So it's a tide, right? So there's a second wave or a second version of pink tide. The first version of pink tide started, so just to put this into context, no? So the first pink tide started in the late 1990s. So you had successive progressive leftist presidents from Ricardo Lagos in 2000, Lula Silva in 2002, Evo Morales in 2005. So Chile, Ricardo Lagos, Lula in Brazil 2002, Evo Morales in Bolivia in 2005, and Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa in 2006. Okay, so we have this is the first wave. And a lot of them, or at least some of them, a little bit over the board. So for instance, Hugo Chavez, a little bit like too much socialist and all, and a lot of failures, etc. But some of them not as much failure. For instance, in the case of Lagos and in the case of Lula, for instance, the situation actually improved for ordinary people on so many fronts. On macroeconomic front, on political front, etc. Although, of course, down the road, there will be a backlash. So right-wing politicians will come into power. So there'll be a reverse wave, a conservative backlash wave later on, right? Especially in Brazil under Bolsonaro, right? But so this was the first wave. Some things went right, some things went wrong. Some things went wrong, right? The worst was in the case of Venezuela and Hugo Chavez. Some could argue the best were in the case of Chile and Lula. And then some would say debatable yung either under Evo Morales. And when you say progressive, it's a spectrum, guys. It's a spectrum. So some are a little bit left na talagang, you know what I'm saying, red na red. But some are more what you can call social democrat, right? Progressive. So, I don't know. Probably in the Philippines, people like Riza Hontiveros are closer to the definition of that. In Germany, it's the ruling party, SPD, Social Democrats, who are closer to that. So, it's a spectrum. Some are more to the center, some more to the left. But nonetheless, all of them were considered as part of what you call the pink tide 1.0. But now, after 10 years and after few years of conservative governments, alt-right, far-right even, in the case of Brazil, for instance, we're now seeing a reverse wave. So in the past 3 or 4 years alone, we have a number of progressive left-leaning leaders again winning in Latin America. So so you had AMLO, right? In the case Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador in 2018 in Mexico, right? So leftist populist leader, former mayor of Mexico City, who took over in Mexico. And then after AMLO, so that's his nickname, you had Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez in 2019, and then you had Bolivian President Luis Arce in 2020, and Peruvian President Pedro Castillo, and more recently, a Chilean President Gabriel Boric. No, Boric, Croatian kasi yung background niya. In 2021. In the case, of course, Gabriel Boric, as you may know, he was a former student activist. Pictures of him have been circulating. He's my age. So he's 30s. I mean, my goodness, this is already the president of Chile. In the case of Castillo, he's a former farmer slash teacher. He worked even in the peripheries of Peru, etc., very close to the indigenous people in Peru, etc., and he was able to defeat Fujimori, right? Anak ng dating diktador na Fujimori, right? And in the case of Chile, Gabriel Boric was also able to defeat a pro-Pinochet candidate, a rich lawyer slash businessman, pro-Pinochet guy. But in both cases, it happened during the runoff elections. So now, the expectation or the bet in the markets is that two others could also join them. So Gustavo Petro, who got more than 40% in the first round in Colombia, former Bogota mayor, may win in the second round. He just needs to pick up around 10% or less than 10% from the remaining votes, and he might just pull it off. Let's see if Hernandez, who's the more like right-wing, more despotic version, will pull off an upset, but Mohan Petro has the better chance in this. And then Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, so the fake corruption charges apparently against him were dropped by the Supreme Court in Brazil, and he might run against Bolsonaro later this year. And all of the surveys are projecting that he's in a very good position to win and once again become Latin America's president. So here we have a second wave of pink in Latin America. So what does it say? It says that with all disinformation, I mean, you think the Philippines is only a haven of disinformation? You don't know what you're talking about, right? US is filled with disinformation. Latin America is filled with disinformation. Yeah, you think there's a problem with critical thinking, education only here? Like, there are not many Finlands around the world, right? So they have those problems also in Latin America, right? A lot of fake news, disinformation, etc. May QAnon na rin yata sa Latin America. You know the QAnon one? Yung sobrang conspiracy theory na Trump is gonna save America from all of these pedophile Democrats and all of that nonsense conspiracy, right? Theory. Some are saying it's spreading among the Latinos also. So the idea that disinformation is the reason why opposition is losing here but not in Latin America, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you have no idea. Disinformation is a big problem in those countries. You think trapo politics, vote buying, vote election violence is an issue in the Philippines only? Forget about it. It's a big, big issue also there in Latin American countries. And yet, they were able to pull off more victories than the liberal reformist forces in the Philippines because A, they're even more progressive and radical. B, they have more grassroots mobilization and base. And C, because they're more manufacturing-oriented countries, they have stronger labor unions, they have stronger middle class, and stronger history of progressive mobilization than the Philippines. So of course, I'm simplifying this. We can talk more about this. Please check my interview with Dr. Cecilia Lero, who has been a fellow at Sao Paulo University in Brazil, and she's been covering Latin America a lot. She's a Pinay American, actually, so she's very familiar with our situation here in Trump and also in Latin America. So please check our interview dyan sa Project Pilipinas. You'll see some of our discussion on this, like anong meron sa Latin America na wala sa Pilipinas, but anong meron sa Latin America na meron din sa Pilipinas, and what lessons we can learn. So I think this is very, very important to keep in mind. All right? Okay. Classroom, may tanong ba kayo dyan? Bakit ito ganyan? Okay. Bakit to ganyan? Di ko na makikita yung comments nyo. Bakit ganon? Nakikita ko lang who's joining. Ha? Wait lang guys Nagko-comment ba kayo dyan? You know what? I'm gonna find a way around this. Let me watch it on another screen. Para makita ko yung... Ayan, ayan. You know what? I'm gonna find a way. Ayan. Pinapanood ko yung sarili ko dito para makita ko yung comments nyo. Kasi ang nakikita ko lang guys dito is yung parang who's watching. So I can see Yang, Buyan, Jean, Endrasa, Paz. I can see Albert Visayas. So, one second So I'm gonna use another screen to see your comments. Alright? So, ayan. Ayan na nagre-react na yung iba. Swipe to the left. To the left. Sabi niya, no? Aha. Parang hindi naman. Hindi. Walang lumalabas. Pero nakikita ko dito yung comments niyo. So, I don't know. Ayan! Ayan! Lumabas na. Okay, walang ya. Yan pala eh. Natakot ako. Mahirap to guys. Di ko nakikita yung comments niyo. Kainis naman ito Kainis naman ito. So, ang point ko lang naman dito is, kung kaya nila dun sa Latin America na mas sabog pa sa atin in many ways, bakit hindi sa Pilipinas, di ba? But I think that's why napakamahalaga for the pink movement in the Philippines to draw inspiration from the pink tide and study carefully what happened in Latin America. Alright? Yun lang. Oh. Ayan. Or nagdi-delay ba yan? Okay. Alright. Di ba nagko-comment kayo? Oh, bakit nagaganon to? Ayan, nakikita ko na. Slide. Ayan, okay na. Okay na. Hindi ko alam bakit. Hindi ko alam. Ayan, thank you very much sa mga nanonood sa akin. Ayan. Ay, sa atin pala, sorry. Thank you kay Jenito. Prof, maraming comments. I know. Now I'm beginning to see the other comments and all. Bakit siya ganon? Ang pinakita lang kanina sa akin yung who's watching lang, hindi yung Anyways, it's okay. Andito na tayo. May mga tanong ba kayo dyan? So, what I'm saying here, guys, is relax lang. Like, in a way, like, marami pang pwedeng mangyari sa atin. Like, you know, even in the most difficult circumstances, progressive forces were able to, to revive themselves, to learn their lessons, to transcend, etc. So, I mean, if you are a supporter of the opposition or the pink movement, look at it. There are 15 million people who voted for Leni. That's not a marginal number. Of course, the other side can say they got 31 million, but 50 million is a lot of people. A lot of these are, and a lot of middle class students, Gen Z, etc., who are very passionately dedicated to the pink movement cause. And for me, just to be clear about it, I don't think the pink movement should be just about one candidate. It shouldn't be just about Leni. And I think they should move ahead out of that whole liberal party, whatever thing. Okay? It really dapat ma-embrace talaga dito is radical progressive. Not yung mga NPA, mga ganun. Baka ma-red tag na naman tayo, walang ya. But when I say that, meaning you push for reforms that really help the Filipino people. Gets mo? Yung mga reformang katulad ng genuine land reform, right? Reformang kailangan, katulad ng you really strengthen labor unions so that employees can really fight for their rights. Yung mga genuine reforms katulad ng strong industrial and trade policy para matulungan natin yung ating mga industriya at manufacturing sector. Right? And I can go on and on and on. And like real independent foreign policy in the sense na hindi tayo tuta ng any bansa. Hindi yung palitan mo lang US for China. That's not independent foreign policy, right? That hindi ko alam yung mga tatay style na ganun. So that's what I'm saying, guys, here. That there's so much that the pink movement can learn, not only from their own experience, but from the successes of other similar movements in similar countries. Kaya nga mahalaga yung comparative analysis. Kaya mahalaga na tinitignan yung ibang bansa. Believe me, disinformation is a problem all around the world, and it's just as bad in many of these countries where still the progressives and all are pulling off great victories. Why? They have better strategy, they have good strategy, they have good communications, they have good team, they have compelling candidates, they have a range of people that more and more average median voters can rally around. So there's a lot that people can learn from. All right? Okay. Yan. Ayan tayo. So yun ang mga pinag-usapan natin. Okay? Any question there? You know, speaking of liberal party, these guys have to really reinvent themselves. So obviously they have a brand problem. They have a track record issue problem. Now they can credibly say, like, hello, like, look at yung kabila, right? But This is politics, right? So brand matters. You have to be able to reinvent yourself. Tingnan mo si Madonna. Since the 1980s, 90s, she keeps on reinventing herself every decade, right? Parang ganun din sa politics. You have to innovate. Parang iPhone. You have to update your software and all. You cannot run the same music and themes and narratives and theme and literally theme and all of that over and over again. You have to upgrade it. You have to update it. You have to boost and reboot yourself. Yun ang talagang kailangan natin dito, guys, di ba? So that is what I've been emphasizing here. Na that's what we have to do. So thank you very much kay Joy. I'm checking here. Thank you very much kay Joy, for Sir, for your support, for stars. Yan. Buenas noches, Mariles. Yan, our friend. Kamusta sa mga friends natin? Wala ba tayong friends dyan sa Latin America? Kamusta mga friends natin sa gitnang silangan, sa America, sa Canada, sa Quezon City? Yan, kay Joy, kay Sir, yan. Oo. Ayan na naman. May troll pala tayo dyan eh. Si Brian ba yan? Sino ba yan? Sino nagtatroll sa akin? Walang yan. Tuloy, di ko nakita yung trolls eh. Dahil dito. Ayan tayo eh. Okay. Ano pa? Kamusta naman kayo dyan, guys? Ayan. May tanong ba kayo? Yan. Okay. And yes, I mean, Latin America is more middle class than us, proportionally. At least some of their countries there, like Chile, for instance, or even Argentina. But nonetheless, I think we're having large enough middle class and progressive folks to create a kind of a force, a kind of a locomotive force to push for a movement for comprehensive change. Yun nga talaga sabi ko, ang kailangan talaga ng Pilipinas ay hindi lang umasa sa isang pamilya, isang dynasty, isang tao, isang partido, para ayusin yung napakalaking problema sa ating bansa. We need a movement. Kilusan po ang kailangan. And we have to work with all sorts of groups, with people from all different socioeconomic classes, etc., to make it effective. Another good example would be also the progressive movement era in the U.S. 100 years ago, when the U.S. was even worse than the Philippines, right? When the middle-class progressive movement actually pushed for reform, and that paved the way later on for good reforms under Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, the strengthening of the bureaucracy and state institutions in America, all of that. So please, we can discuss this more and more in the coming days and all. But for now, just one thing you have to keep in mind is this. Be informed about what's happening in other countries, especially countries similar to us, and look what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. And then from there, right, you can think about the future for your own country. That's really the best way forward. That comparative analysis is good for your mind, it's good for your heart, it's good for your soul, right? And being informed always helps, right? So we're going to talk more about Latin America and other elections soon. But in the meantime, I have to go. Meron pa tayong meetings. I hope not too much traffic, etc. Marami tayong gagawin na meetings and all. But I'm really, really glad that we had a chance. So recap lang pinag-usapan natin yung false notion of exceptionalism. We talk about Gini coefficient dito sa Pilipinas, right? Yung inequality of wealth concentration. So those are some of the comparative analysis. Why it matters. What's comparative analysis all about. So these are the things that we discussed today. All right? Thank you very much, classroom. Talk to you soon. All right? Sana maayos na tong issue na to kasi hindi ko nakikita yung comments niya. Nakikita ko lang sinong nakikinig sa akin. Like, si Coylin, Arcadio, si Benny, Arellano, si Winifredo, Alagubaya, etc. But I don't see who's commenting. I don't know what's going on here. Anong ginagawa ni Meta sa akin? Kahapon pa to nakakainis Oh, wow. So dito sa baba, ang dami pa lang pwedeng gawin. I can even put a poll. Wow. Ano to? Oh, I can lighten it up. Interesting. And then, what is this? Is this like, what is this? You can put background. Okay, I'm just learning. Marami ka palang pwede gawin dito sa baba Kasang nakakainis nga, ito yung problem. Swipe to the left to reveal comments. Yun nga, it doesn't bring naman. Unless wala talaga kayong comments, but it doesn't make sense. Wala talaga kayong comments. Which is weird, right? Usually we have constant comments. Alright? Okay. Alright, don't worry. I-refresh natin yan. Hopefully it will be better, okay? Yun lang, talagang kanina hindi ko makikita yung comments. Hindi ko alam bakit. Which is a bit nakakainis. Kahapon pa, pati yung Twitter ko, pagbukas ko yung Twitter ko, iba na rin yung interface niya. Para mukha na siyang Facebook, yung Twitter. Walang hiya. Hindi na siya unique. Alright, so I don't know what's going on with these people. Alright? Okay. Alright, let's discuss this more. There's much to talk about. So yun, tuloy-tuloy po ang ating diskusyon para na may akit natin yung antas ng diskusyon sa ating bansa. Oh, wala tayong ina-attack, wala tayong bastusan. We're polite and reasonable people here. Alright? Thank you so much.